Hello, my friends. In this video, I'm going to look at expanding the storage on my classic Mac Pro. You know, you look at storage nowadays, and of course, all the attention is on SSDs. And SSDs are great to run operating systems and to launch programs and all of that. But when it comes to large volume storage, I think the spinning hard disk still has a place, especially with large sizes. And I don't know how long that data on the SSDs is going to last. So, you know, will it be there in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? I understand SSDs are supposed to last about 10 years, but I don't know. They're still fairly new, and I don't have the confidence with them that I have with spinning hard drives. Getting on the Mac Pro upgrade group, Jean-Paul Rotier, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, mentioned that he bought this specific drive. It's a Seagate IronWolf 8 terabyte. And what's nice about it, it's designed for NAS use. I'm not really going to use it as a NAS, so it's a little over-designed for my needs. But, you know, it's $139 as opposed to like even a 4 terabyte solid-state drive would be many times that. But it's a 7,200 RPM drive, so the performance isn't going to be terrible. It's not going to be like an SSD, but not terrible. But the thing I like about it the most is that it fits the original Mac Pro disk sled. And a lot of the higher capacity disks have a screw right there. And so you'd need a screw right there on your tray in order to use that. But this drive has, this is hard to do backwards. Let's see. We have a screw here and a screw here, and we have this hole here. So it can use any of those trays, including the original Mac Pro tray. So I have two of these, and I'm going to be installing a RAID 1 in my computer. So a RAID 1, this is not going to be a video about RAID levels, by the way. I don't know much about them, and there's a lot of good information out there. But specifically with two drives, you have the option of RAID 0 and RAID 1. RAID 0 takes your data stream and splits it in two, so it can write to two disks at the same time and read from two disks at the same time. And therefore, it makes it faster, right? Twice as fast to write, twice as fast to read. And the problem with that is that if either of the disks fail, you're going to lose your data. A RAID 1, on the other hand, takes the data and it writes it to both disks and reads it from both disks. And so so each disk has the full data in it. So if either disk fails, you still have the data on the other disk. So it's redundancy. Now, this is not the same as a backup because there are things that can cause both disks to fail at the same time. Something like a flood or a fire, or maybe even some kind of power surge or something could knock out both your hard drives at the same time because they're in the same machine. So this would not be what you'd want to do for a business, for example. You might want to go to a higher level of data security with offsite backups and things like that. But for my purposes, I think this is going to be enough. I think this is enough security that I fully expect both of these drives to last 20 years. And if one of them does happen to fail, I can get another drive to replace it and copy my data. Two of the options that we're going to look at are an external enclosure with a hardware RAID solution or an internal software RAID. And I ended up going with the software RAID. My requirement for this was I used both Windows and macOS on my computer, and I wanted something that I could operate out of both operating systems. Thanks to John DeGroof of the Mac Pro Upgrade Group, he suggested that I used SoftRAID by OWC, and that's what I ended up using. It's a $50 program, and it works. It has a version for Windows and a version for macOS. And I was able to use the same license to install it on both of those operating systems so I can operate my RAID or manage my RAID on either system, either operating system. So what's on the rest of the video is we're going to download and install SoftRAID. We're going to install it on Windows first. We're going to set up the RAID on Windows. Then we're going to switch over to macOS, and we're going to install SoftRAID on macOS. Watch it recognize the RAID that we already set up on Windows. And we're going to run the Blackmagic disk speed test just to see what this looks like. Then we're going to look at network sharing. We're going to share the RAID on my home network and access it from another Mac I have in a different room and show that you know what that kind of looks like, sharing a a disk on the network and accessing it. Here it is. So it's on sale for $139.99, $140 a piece, 8 terabytes. And notice that the 8 terabyte is a 7200 RPM drive. And if you kick that down one step to the 6 terabyte, that is a 5600 RPM drive. So in this series, these Seagate IronWolfs, 6 terabyte and down is the 5600 RPM, and 8 terabytes and up are the 7200 RPM. So that to me was the deciding factor that I wanted to go with the 8 terabyte. Not only do I get 2 more terabytes of storage in case I ever need it, but it's also going to be a faster drive. And this is the Seagate IronWolf product manual for the ST8000VN004, which is the drive that Jean-Paul Routier mentioned, and the one that I bought as well. And you go down here, you can read lots of information about mean time between failure, reliability, and things like that. Lots of good stuff in here. A lot of things that I don't understand. But down here is the drawing that shows the screw pattern, and you can get a ruler out and measure the screw spacing on the drive trays and see that it fits. And why is that important? Well, you can buy a third-party drive tray from OWC that has the screw pattern that we need to fit these drives, but that's another $25 per drive, and I'm putting 2 drives in, so that would have been another $50 on top of mine. So we have our hard drive selected. We're using the Seagate IronWolf 8 terabyte. It's a NAS rated drive. And my next question is, I want to set this up in some kind of a RAID. I want to do a redundant RAID or a mirrored RAID, and I didn't know how I could format it. I use both Windows and macOS on my Mac Pro, and so I wanted some kind of a solution that would read and write macOS and Windows equally. And I didn't even know if that was realistically possible to do when we started this. So I went on Mac Pro Upgrade and I said, this is what I want to do. I need to do some kind of a RAID that would be accessible in both Monterey and Windows 10, 11 in the future. Would it need to be a hardware RAID to accomplish this? Is anybody doing it? What device? And I got some very good comments back. And this first one here is from Andrew Beavis. And he suggested this. To get an external enclosure, OWC Mercury Elite Pro Dual. Now, this video is going to sound like an advertisement for OWC. I don't have any connection to them. They're not paying me a penny for any of this. This is just what came up when I went to ask what I should do. This one, you put the 2 hard drives in the enclosure, and it has a hardware RAID. You can set it to RAID 0, RAID 1, SPAN, or independent modes. USB 3.0, so it has 5 gigabits per second, which is plenty fast enough for these spinning drives. Nice aluminum design, looks like it would go well with the Mac Pro. And these are the storage options. You can get them pre-configured with drives up to 40 terabytes. But I already picked my drive, so this is the one I would pick. So this is $95. And so on the Surface, either I buy $95 or I buy software to do a software RAID, and that's the kind of the cost comparison. I think the advantage to this would be the portability, that I could, put the drives in here, use them for my Mac Pro for a couple of years, and then, maybe I'm going to upgrade to a custom-built PC or something, and then I would be able to just plug this right into that. Let me go back to the Facebook posting, the storage options. John DeGroof is always reliable for good technical information, and he suggested to use SoftRAID, not macOS's RAID. SoftRAID works in Windows as well. You can use the same license key for both macOS and Windows version. I would also format the RAID as NTFS in Windows, then get a Paragon NTFS license so that you can write to the RAID in macOS. And boy, that Paragon NTFS is a real solution, because I have an NTFS formatted drive in my system, but I could never write to it with macOS. So that was a kind of a Windows only drive that I set up for games and such. But with this, I can absolutely write to that. So I have Paragon NTFS for Windows right here. It's a $20 purchase. I'm actually not, well, it is kind of part of the cost of doing the software RAID, because I wouldn't have had to do this if I had chosen the hardware RAID solution. But this is so useful that I would have bought this anyway, even if I weren't doing this. But anyway, this gives me full read and write access to all of my drives, including this JetDrive here, which is a 960 gigabyte SSD that I couldn't write to with macOS before. So good suggestion, John. Appreciate that. Jorg comes on and says, format in exFAT. That's how I had the drive that I am replacing was formatted in exFAT, so I could access it in both. And then we get into a discussion about why NTFS. And John, again, I prefer NTFS for shared storage and using Paragon NTFS in macOS to be able to write to NTFS. And so I asked him why, and he said NTFS is faster, NTFS is more mature, NTFS has a lot more file system features, ACL, shadow copies, NTFS junctions, encrypted file systems, journaling, etc. I don't know what any of that means, but I trust that John knows what it means and take his word for it. exFAT is the next generation from FAT, which is meant for portable devices and cross-platform interop. The only Windows drive format that beats NTFS in many but not all ways is ReFS, which is considered a next-gen file system like BTRFS and ZFS. I don't know what that means either. Based on that suggestion, I went ahead with the exFAT. He suggested SoftRAID, which is also an OWC project. So remember that whether we go with a hardware RAID or whether we go with a software RAID, we're looking at both products from OWC. So yeah, this ends up being an OWC commercial. But you can go to this page yourself and read up all the details on the benefits of software RAID versus hardware RAID. But the nice thing about this one is it has a Windows version and has a macOS version. So I can install it on my Windows installation and install on my macOS. I can fully run the RAID and set things up and control things, whichever OS I happen to be booted in. And it is fully read and write capable from both. There's a 14-day trial on here, and that's what I did. And actually, that's what I have running right now, and that's this. So I have SoftRAID running. I can launch it, and here's my RAID. Draws a little line to the two drives that are part of the RAID. So these are my 8 terabyte disks here, and it's in a RAID 1 mirror, so I have 8 terabytes available. And and then this is my JetDrive, which is the 960 gigabyte. This is actually a little side story on that. This is a 960 gigabyte SATA SSD that was in my 2012 MacBook Air. The MacBook Air used a proprietary SSD. It's a long, skinny stick. It looks kind of like an NVMe, but it's not an NVMe. And Syntec makes a couple of adapters that will use this, and I'm actually using a PCIe adapter to have this in my Mac Pro, and it works well. That's what I use for my games. It's formatted NTFS. I had to format it that way to be able to install Flight Simulator on it. That's what I use for Flight Simulator and any other games. I'm not a big gamer, by the way. I play a few games, and that's one of the things I can do with my Mac Pro, and I like to do that especially in the winter. Now I'll reboot in Windows and look up SoftRAID. Software RAID management for Mac and Windows. You see there's a SoftRAID Lite for $50, and that's what I'm going to end up paying the license for. I'll go to the free trial download to get started and make sure everything works for me. So go ahead and click the download trial button, and here it comes. Open it up. And install. This black screen, the screen recorder doesn't record when it has that security message that pops up. And so that's why it went black there for a minute. Everything I'm showing you in this part of the video is in real time. I haven't sped anything up, so you can get a real sense for the amount of time it takes to install this. Yay, installation successful, must restart the computer. So we'll go ahead and restart it. And now it rebooted and opened up SoftRAID, and of course it gave me the security message again that I have to accept it. Asked me if I wanted to connect to a RAID. I'm choosing to create a RAID, so we'll create a mirrored RAID. Again, just like macOS, we'll have to pick the 2 disks that we want to be in our RAID. And here's where we get to choose the format. So we'll keep with the NTFS. And of course, I have the size of the RAID maximum, so I want to use the entire amount of the disks that I can. Wasn't sure about this safeguard. Yeah, so that looks like a good thing to do. All right, we're ready to create the volume. Okay, so I got it all installed in Windows. Now I'm going to go into macOS. I'm going to download and install SoftRAID in my macOS installation. So I'll download the free 14-day trial on here, and this time I'll choose SoftRAID for Mac. Download it. Yeah, I think I better allow downloads, or else I won't be able to do this. Okay, again, this is all real time. This is how long it takes to download. It's pretty quick. Drag it into the application folder. Now I have the application folder open, and here is SoftRAID. Some documentation in there, which would be nice. Open it. After carefully reading and understanding the license agreement, I'll accept it. So there's a driver update that I need to do now. Now we get into the security and privacy setting on Apple. So it tells me I have to come in here and click this lock. I have to put my password in, or I can double tap my Apple Watch. Put the password in, and now I have to click allow on the other world computing and a restart. So restart it again. Now we're restarted. Nothing in this window seems concerning to me. And here we are. Here's the RAID in the upper right. It draws the green line to show the 2 drives that are part of the RAID. So it's already recognized the RAID. Remember, we set this RAID up in Windows. Now we're in macOS. Didn't have to recreate the RAID. It just recognized it. There is nothing in the RAID. Now remember, it's an NTFS formatted RAID, and macOS does not write to NTFS drives. So as I try to drag these files and copy them in, they don't copy. So the solution to that is Paragon NTFS. That will allow full read and write access to NTFS. macOS can already read NTFS, but it takes this software to be able to write to it. So we will install this. This also has a trial. This works quite well. So we'll install it. I never understood why some programs for the Mac you'd have to drag a little icon to a folder. Other applications you can just double click on them. I don't know why it's not consistent like that. So again, accept the terms and conditions after carefully reading them, of course. And type a password to allow it. Again, this is a real-time install. This is all the time it takes to install it. So we have another Apple security and privacy authorization to do. This time I'm going to double tap my Apple Watch and use that to permit it. And it takes another restart. So we're restarted. We're in macOS again. And here is the mounting the RAID volume. And it will pop up in the upper right corner of the screen when it's mounted, just like an external drive would. It does seem to treat the RAID like an external drive in macOS, and there it is. And here's a SoftRAID window. Looks just like it did in Windows. Now I'm going to try to copy some files over to it. So we're in macOS. We're writing to a NTFS formatted drive, and there we go. And these are video files. These are actually the screen recordings that I made for this video. Now we're at Blackmagic Disk Speed Test, booted in macOS. And I'll select the RAID 1 as the target drive and go ahead and push start and run the speed test. So the write is going to end up at about 245 megabytes per second. Right about where we expected to be. And the read is going to be 200 and I think it stops at about 225. I'm a little disappointed in this. I was hoping that with a mirrored RAID it would increase the playback speed or the read speed, but apparently it's reading at the same speed as one drive would read. But yeah, 225. Okay, now I'm going to go to the Get Info and I'm going to share this. I want to be able to access this data on other computers in my network. So now, even though it looks just like the same Mac Pro that you saw me drop the drives into, this is a different Mac. We set up a second office during the pandemic where we had multiple people working at home. And so we have a downstairs office and an upstairs office, and they both feature a Mac Pro. So we'll start this and use the Open Core Boot Picker to choose macOS. And it's booting. And so now I'm on another computer accessing the RAID that we set up over the network, and I'm actually on Wi-Fi. I'm not even on a wired connection, so I just want to see how fast I can open a file up and look at it. These are some old historical pictures. I have a bunch of old historical things. Basically, I can, these are fairly large files, but I can double click them and wait a second or two and they open up. So it's probably not as snappy as it would be using the same computer, but doesn't seem like we're losing a lot of performance over the network.